As great as it was to finally get more Dragon Ball, not every fan of the franchise got on board with Dragon Ball Super, and it's not hard to see why. Between the bad animation, weird jokes, and sagas that don't quite stick the landing, it's clear that Super doesn't exactly live up to the power of Dragon Ball Z. Plus, it just can't beat the classics, and Dragon Ball Z is overall the superior series. That said, there are some things that Dragon Ball Super did a lot better than Dragon Ball Z. From the Beerus Saga to Dragon Ball Super Broly, let's take a look at all the things that Super does better than DBZ. Fans might be mixed on Dragon Ball Super, but there's only one thing they can't deny is great about the series: the humor. The original Dragon Ball started out as an adventure comedy, and as the series progressed, the humor was dropped in favor of the action martial arts elements. This continued in Dragon Ball Z, and it's all action and some comedy thrown in. Not to say that this made Dragon Ball Z stale or anything, but it was nice to see comedy return to the franchise in Dragon Ball Super. From Goku's dim-wittedness to the slice-of-life episodes, Dragon Ball Super knocks it out of the park with the comedy, bringing a sense of fun to a show that might otherwise be a bunch of serious scowls and fights. Some of the best comedic episodes in the series include when Goku lost control of his ki, when Universe 6 and 7 competed in a baseball match against each other, and when Goku impatiently waited to train with Whis. While Dragon Ball Z had a few humorous moments and episodes, like Goku and Piccolo learning to drive, Dragon Ball Super's humor tends to make things a bit more lively. Another thing that Dragon Ball Super does better than Dragon Ball Z is raising the stakes. Now, you could argue that Dragon Ball Z did a good job of raising the stakes with each saga, thus making the story more interesting and the situation more perilous for our heroes, but Dragon Ball Super cranked the concept up to 11. In Dragon Ball Z, we started with the Saiyans, warriors with power beyond the belief that came to Earth. From there, things were escalated by the heroes going to space, where aliens like Frieza and his army stood as some of the most powerful adversaries that Goku and his friends had ever faced. This trend continued with the androids, Cell and Buu, all of whom were simply stronger than the last antagonists. Dragon Ball Super used a similar concept, but also built out and expanded the universe to increase the scale of the series and thus put more at stake when the new antagonist showed up. The most notable expansion was when the Dragon Ball multiverse was revealed, a concept that raised the stakes when the Tournament of Power came around, as each universe had to fight each other or be erased. How's that for stakes? We mentioned earlier how Dragon Ball Super does humor much better than Dragon Ball Z, and that most of it is derived from the slice-of-life episodes. Those episodes and moments are actually another thing we believe that Super does better than Z. While some fans might be annoyed at it, Dragon Ball Super tends to devote quite a bit of time to the day-to-day lives of Goku and friends. And while Z did the same, it was often in the form of low-quality filler, with Goku and Piccolo's driving lesson being one of the few gems. Dragon Ball Super, on the other hand, does a much better job with these slice-of-life episodes, finding humor in putting Goku, Vegeta, and other superhuman martial artists in everyday situations that, as shonen characters, they definitely don't belong in. We also appreciate fun relationship moments, something that Dragon Ball Super has in spades, from Gohan and Vidal's home life to Bulma and Vegeta's adorable bickering, and Chi-Chi attempting to stop Goku from training. No matter how you put it, Dragon Ball Super is sometimes at its best when showing the day-to-day lives of the characters, something it does better than Z ever did. If you ask the biggest, most dedicated Dragon Ball fan, you'll find that even they have a few plot holes and unanswered questions to complain about when it comes to DBZ. Perhaps this is a bit of an exaggeration, but the point stands. Dragon Ball Z had a lot of issues, from plot holes to continuity errors to problematic and undesirable elements. Dragon Ball Super, on the other hand, actually goes to great lengths to address some of these issues. One of the most significant examples of this was when the Kais explained how Goku and Vegeta ended up unfusing despite Potara fusions being said to be permanent. In the Future Trunks saga of Dragon Ball Super, we learned the reason behind this. Some fans speculated that it was the magical nature of Buu's innards, but Super revealed that Potara fusions are only permanent when two Kais fuse, and they have a 1-hour time limit when mortals use earrings. Dragon Ball Super also addressed the major issue of Master Roshi, whose perverted ways stand as one of the series' most problematic aspects. But Super had him get over his weakness for women, ridding the franchise of his disgusting behavior once and for all. Dragon Ball Z was a major zag from the series that came before it. Sure, Dragon Ball had already started to shift the series' focus on antagonist-based sagas, but Z almost feels like an entirely different world compared to Dragon Ball. This is obviously a result of the manga and the time skip that took place between the Piccolo Jr. saga and the Saiyan saga. But still, the two eras of Dragon Ball are very different. As such, DBZ feels lacking in elements established in Dragon Ball, aside from the characters, while Dragon Ball Super makes a lot more callbacks to the original series. Some examples of this include a second crossover episode with Dr. Slump and the return of the Pilaf Gang. The Pilaf Gang is a major one, since it brought back the series' first antagonists and gave them a redemptive arc similar to the villains that came later in the series. Additionally, the Evil Containment Wave also came back, the move being used in the future Trunks saga and in the Tournament of Power. We also saw Goku and Krillin go back to Master Roshi for training at one point, and even saw Goku use the Flying Nimbus again. Now that is old school. Next up, let's talk about filler, or rather Dragon Ball Super's lack of it. For those who don't know, filler is what happens when an anime adapting a manga catches up with the source material and has to create original stories to stall for time, so the manga can build up more story content to adapt. Dragon Ball was notorious for its filler in both the first series and in Dragon Ball Z, but this is not the case in Dragon Ball Super. Sure, there are inconsequential episodes that could be considered filler under a certain definition, but since Super is an original series not adapted from a manga, there is technically no filler in it. In this regard, Super is superior to Dragon Ball Z in that it doesn't have any non-canon material. Again, some of the mini-sagas between the larger ones of Dragon Ball Super are definitely in the same vein as filler from DBZ and Dragon Ball, but there's nothing non-canon about these mini-arcs. This is a big plus that Super has over Z, since there's no need to skip over any non-canon material, and there is no need to debate which episodes are and are not part of the main timeline, even though people still do. Once Dragon Ball entered its final saga before Dragon Ball Z, the center of martial arts and strength became more focused on power, who had more of it, training to gain more of it, and all that. Instead of strength coming from physical strength as well as interesting mutations, abilities, and techniques, it was only about the former. This made for some of the best parts of Dragon Ball Z, don't get us wrong, but we saw fewer and fewer opponents with unique strengths that went beyond power levels and ki blasts. Dragon Ball Super, on the other hand, managed to bring a lot of this back, starting with the Universe 6 saga. Chalk this up to the fact that Goku and Vegeta's insane power levels make it hard to create stronger opponents. But Super did a great job of creating and introducing characters with unique abilities, like Batomo's pliable body that absorbs damage or Hit's time skip power that combat regular strength and power. These interesting powers and opponents harken back to early Dragon Ball, when shape-shifting and turning people into characters could stop even the strongest opponent in their tracks. It's a nice throwback to the weirdness of Dragon Ball that Dragon Ball Z lacked. Next up, let's take a look at how Z and Super handled future Trunks. In DBZ, when Trunks first showed up, it was easily one of the most badass moments in the series. He was a cool time-traveling warrior with a sick jacket, a sword, a Super Saiyan transformation, and the power to defeat Frieza and his daddy within seconds. In short, it was an epic way to introduce the character, and painted Trunks like he was going to be a driving force in the androids and Cell sagas, which was not the case. Not long after he was introduced, Trunks was effectively sidelined, barely fighting Cell and getting killed during the Cell games. In contrast, his saga in Dragon Ball Super went much differently. Instead of getting sidelined, Trunks had an effective role in fighting Goku, Black, and future Zamasu. In fact, he defeated them when they fused together, pushing his power to a new level and using the hope of all the people he was trying to protect to form a giant frickin' energy sword that sliced fused Zamasu into oblivion. Now that's a satisfying use of future Trunks, undoubtedly placing Super's Trunks-focused saga above Dragon Ball Z's. Pretty much every saga of Dragon Ball Z introduced a new transformation, from Kaioken in the Saiyan saga to Super Saiyan 3 in the Buu saga. Dragon Ball Super was similar in this regard, but the forms introduced were arguably more interesting than those introduced by its predecessor. Don't get us wrong, Super Saiyan, Super Saiyan 2, and Super Saiyan 3 are all awesome and badass in their own right, but, well, just think about the forms and their names. They're not very visually or conceptually different from each other. Each subsequent form is just more Super Saiyan. Dragon Ball Super, on the other hand, at least attempted to do something different with the new transformations it introduced. In the series, we got Super Saiyan God, which introduced godly ki, Super Saiyan Blue, which was a unique hybrid form, and Ultra Instinct, which is the culmination of all martial arts that allowed Goku to move autonomously and fight with perfect reflexes and instinct. Now, don't all those sound much more interesting than just getting another number in the Super Saiyan line of transformations? We'd say so, which is why we also say Super handled new transformations better than DBZ. The animation in Dragon Ball Super is a constant source of ridicule directed at the series. And with good reason, as the rushed production resulted in some unsatisfying visuals throughout most of the series, save for a few episodes. Dragon Ball Super Broly made up for this by presenting what is without a doubt the best animation we've ever seen in a piece of Dragon Ball media ever. And since Broly is under the Dragon Ball Super title, we can consider it part of the series, and thus Dragon Ball Super's animation is far superior to anything that ever appeared in Dragon Ball Z. Again, we're only referring to the animation of Dragon Ball Super Broly. But the point still stands that this part of the franchise gave us the best animation in Dragon Ball, far outclassing even the most well-animated and most beloved sequences and fights in Dragon Ball Z. Not only are the designs the perfect amalgam of Toriyama's late Dragon Ball, early DBZ art style and the look of the series towards around the Buu saga, the movement and fluidity are also top-notch. Seriously, when you're comparing Dragon Ball Super Broly and the best sequences of DBZ, Broly wins, baby, no contest. One of the other ways that Dragon Ball Super called back to original Dragon Ball more than Z did was by making older characters relevant again. What do we mean by this? Well, think about Master Roshi. After the King Piccolo saga, he stepped back as an active fighter in the series and fully retired as the world's guardian throughout all of Z, being delegated to a source of comic relief through his perverted actions. However, in Dragon Ball Super, Master Roshi made a couple of subtle returns to the spotlight, eventually making a full comeback when he was chosen to be a member of Universe 7's fighting team in the Tournament of Power. He wasn't the only character to get this kind of return, comebacks that were pretty absent in Dragon Ball Z. Other characters to make a return to the spotlight were Pilaf, Mai and Shu, Tenshinhan, Frieza, and Arale of Dr. Slump. Some of these characters might not have done a whole lot when they returned to the series, but it's still worth pointing out that Dragon Ball Super was much better about bringing back characters than Z was. Now if they could just bring Launch back. Another thing we think Dragon Ball Super handles better than Z is the relationship between Goku and Vegeta. Now, before we set off any angry comments, we're not talking about how Goku helped Vegeta become a good guy. That's more a part of Vegeta's character arc, which Z definitely did better, and Super just kinda rehashes. No, we're talking about the actual dynamic between the two Saiyans, which in Z was not much more than a simple rivalry. However, in Dragon Ball Super, there is more wiggle room with their rivalry. They get to be a bit more friendly, and they often fight alongside each other, which makes for a stronger dynamic. The result is that they have much more fun interactions, making for some great humor and dynamic team-ups. Now that Vegeta is a good guy and much less grumpy than his Buu Saga days, the franchise can have more fun with how he interacts with Goku, which is a major benefit of Super picking up a bit after the end of Z. Some fun examples of this dynamic are when Goku and Vegeta related over their love of their strong-willed wives, and when they were sparring in Dragon Ball Super Broly. Next up, let's talk about Broly. Prior to the canon reboot of the character that came under the Dragon Ball Super umbrella, Broly previously appeared in Dragon Ball Z films that were not great. The first one had its merits, but still fell flat in a lot of regards, as the two sequels were they were garbage. Oh, Bio Broly. The Z movie's version of Broly was little more than a Super Saiyan version of the Hulk, an overpowered mass of rage and underdevelopment simply created to serve as a tough-to-beat antagonist. Beyond the concept of his crazy strength, there wasn't much to Z Broly, so there was clearly a lot of room to improve in the Super reboot. And improve it did, since the Dragon Ball Super version of Broly is not only a more well-rounded character with a much stronger film, he's also actually part of the main canon. In nearly every way imaginable, Dragon Ball Super Broly vastly improved the titular character, giving him agency, a tragic past, a chance for redemption, and a better depiction of his immense legendary power. In short, the Dragon Ball Super version of Broly is far better than how Dragon Ball Z handled him. Bringing back the concept of interesting, wacky, and unique powers wasn't the only way that Dragon Ball Super managed to make battles more interesting. It also incorporated far more strategy into fights, something that Z sometimes failed to do. This could also be considered something that was brought back from the original Dragon Ball, since the fights tended to evenly divide the focus on power and technique. Regardless, it's very clear that Dragon Ball Super made a point to, well, point out these strategies, the approaches and planning that Goku, Vegeta, and the others put into the battles they fought. Perhaps the reason for this is because of power scaling, meaning it's hard to show just how strong Goku and Vegeta are with how powerful they've become. so showing their improved technique and strategy is the next best thing. Regardless of if this is the reason, the point stands that Super did a much better job of showing Goku and friends putting actual strategy into their fighting, rather than just using all their power to defeat an opponent. Case in point, Goku used his wits to figure out Hit's abilities before powering up to combat them, instead of just going full power against him. Last and certainly not least, we have the introduction of female Super Saiyans, something that Dragon Ball Z absolutely failed to do. Heck, Dragon Ball Z failed to even include more female warriors beyond Android 18 and Videl. Dragon Ball Super, on the other hand, not only had plenty of female warriors in the Tournament of Power, it also gave us the first canon full-blooded female Saiyans to appear in the franchise, Caulifla and Kale, both of whom were also the first female Super Saiyans in the series. This was a huge deal for both the series and its fans. For a long time, lovers of Dragon Ball demanded to see female Saiyans, and even when we got Pan, Bulla, and the non-canon Fasha, we never got to see them as Super Saiyans. In other words, Dragon Ball Super did what Dragon Ball Z never did by introducing female Super Saiyans. On top of this, Caulifla and Kale were actually pretty interesting characters. Sure, Kale was just a female version of Broly, but her and Caulifla's relationship is really well done, and both the characters are a major breath of fresh air. So there you have it, the 15 things we think that Dragon Ball Super does better than Dragon Ball Z. Our favorite definitely has to be the awesome animation and rebooted backstory of Broly. What about you? Let us know your favorite, or if we left anything out in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to CBR for more Dragon Ball videos.